how to converse better. So our goals are help them navigate conversations, especially in different situations, and also to add in maybe teaching them a little bit about how hygiene is important with those conversations and how they can help improve conversations. So, with one quick reward system in our game also is one of your motivations is to also collect gold coins when you complete good conversations. And let's go into how to do this. Our game is a card-based game, so we tried to figure out how can we randomize conversations, and we thought of dice, we thought of cards, we thought of human aspects. So we kind of took two of those, which is the human aspect and cards. So we're kind of making a game that adds a little bit of magic and killer bunnies and munchkins if you know what those are. So types of cards in our game, there's 4 main types of cards. First is appearance cards. These are cards that you can play on yourself or on others. So kind of a defense and an offensive card. These include some examples would be like playing a dirty shirt on someone, so that would say, oh, you have a dirty shirt, and the only way to get rid of it is to get the card that says clean shirt, or take a shower, or change clothes, or something like that. And which are defense cards, like I have up here, take a shower. And these can be played on you, and they stay on your character. And the idea is, if you play the dirty shirt card on someone else, it stays on them until they get the card, and every turn they lose 1 coin. So it's a recurring thing every time until they change that. Next set of cards is expression cards. So when we talk and express, like I'm talking right now using my hands and very excited with you guys, there are other expressions like laughing, joking, sympathy with someone that got hurt or has a bad day, and things like that. So we're trying to add in expression cards, and I'll talk about how those get added in later. And so number 3 are conversation cards. This is the biggest section of the game. In this, you have 4 types of conversations: interview, party, friend, and dating. So these are 4 types of conversations that we felt were kind of some of the biggest and most common conversations that are very important for people to converse well in. And the idea is, so we types of cards, and on them will say interview. So you would play that, and that would be on a conversation with an interview, right? So in an interview, you wouldn't talk about how I love cheese puffs, but you would talk about how I'm good at using Microsoft Word, or how I can write really well. And in the conversation cards, there are questions and answers. So questions and responses. So that way you can actually build a conversation. And our last one is disruption. So sometimes things happen while you're talking to someone and something goes on, and how you react to that. This is kind of a quick side play, and what would happen is a disruption card would come up, and it's kind of like a play immediately. When you pick it out of the deck, you would play right on the table and pick up another card with your hand. And everyone would have 1 turn to react to that card. And the only kind of reaction would be obviously expressions. So, for an example, say somebody trips. Well, laughing at someone that trips, we might think it's funny. It's really not funny, right? Socially, that's not a good thing. So, instead, maybe you'd play a sympathy expression on it. Like, oh, are you okay? So that way, everybody in the game can have 1 turn to play on it, and they get points for that. If they don't play, that doesn't hurt them, but they don't get the extra points. Or if they play bad cards, like they make a joke about that person laughing, that will take coins away from them. So it discourages them from doing it. Alright. One more thing before we kind of go over a little more of the gameplay is in a single turn, you would have 6 cards in your hand already, and this, we may change this depending on how our play tests go in the next couple of weeks. But we decided 6 cards, and in your play with those, you can lay 1 of the appearance cards, so the kind of the defense or offensive cards. Then you can play as many conversation cards as you have that are relevant to the table. Then there's, you can play your expression cards if you want to with those conversation cards to emphasize and kind of make combos of your conversation. And if there's any disruption cards on the table, you can play on those, like we talked about in the trip. At the end of your turn, you collect your coins depending on how well your conversations went, how many points you got, or put coins back. So if you had 3 3 stinky shirts on, or a stinky shirt, or you never showered, so you smell bad breath or something, you have to put points back for those. And then the last one, you draw enough cards to make a hand out of 6. And that way it gives the person the next turns, which can play 2 players, 3 players, or really would like to play as a 4-player game. And so it would give you all that time to kind of look at your cards and plan on what you want to do next. Okay, so here's what the game, here's kind of a diorama of our game, the gameplay. So on the table you see, right in the middle is the deck, that's where you draw your cards from. And all these cards sit in the middle are conversations that are already going on in this game. So we're already into this game, right? And player 1, his hand has a defense card, an action card, or an offensive card, and then several conversation cards. So he can play, or she can play one of these, so defense on himself, or take this and put it on someone else, and then play conversations. So to start a conversation would be a question, right? So you ask someone a question, like, how are you doing today? Or in an interview would ask, what skills do you have? I mean, it's pretty generic, but it's a question. And so I can lay down a question card, and then I can respond with my answer cards to other questions that are already on the platform. Maybe there's a dating one that's asking how many people are in your family, and you have a card that matches and says, well, I have a big family, or I have 2 brothers, or something like that. And then, so the idea of our game, trying to put it in more of a broad perspective, is we're trying to focus on conversations, how to build them in the right contexts, and then by doing so, you gain points or coins, and it rewards you for doing them correctly, right? So and then if you put the wrong things on them, then you either don't get points or you'll lose points, depending on the severity of what it is. And on the cards, it'll kind of say, so it's a friend card, you're talking with a friend, and it's a question that's, for example, what's your favorite sports? Then under it will say, certain sports cards will add to it and you get a coin if you play those. So then you try to go through your hand, and if you have those, you want to play them on it, and then maybe an expression card with it, and then you combo those and get maybe 2 coins or 3 coins instead of just 1 for playing one good answer. So also with our conversations, we also wanted to address the idea of being hygienic, which is these other cards on the side, so I really like the idea that if you play, a torn jeans card or something, even though that's, I guess, kind of popular now, torn jeans, but non-good torn jeans, right? I mean, there's a stain on them. Those are kind of popular now too. Anyway, bad examples, I'm sorry. You play those on someone, they sit on them and they lose points every round until they get rid of them, right? So until I go take a shower, I'm still going to be stinky, or until I eat a piece of gum or brush my teeth, I have bad breath, and that's going to affect my conversations with people. A lot of this stuff is still in the development stage, and we need a lot of feedback, which is my next slide. We need actually really good, legitimate conversations, and we'd like to sit down and meet with you guys about what conversation you'd like to teach. What would be good for them, what do they need to know, and then we can have dialogue off of those, and use that as our cards. Also, are the 4 conversation types what we're looking to accomplish? Are those hitting the types that we want? Do you want more? Or should we back it down to 2 or 3 to make it a little bit less complicated? Or is it where it should be? So that's conversations we need to have. Same with the expression cards, the distractions. That may be something we want to take out completely, but we like it because it adds one more element to the game, kind of keeps it more realistic and very random. And then appearance items, what items would be worth having? Is the dirty shirt a good one or not? And stuff like that. So what we need to do for the next 4 weeks is quite a bit, but I think for core-wise, we found something we really like, and we'd like to know if you like it. So do you have any questions about this stuff or anything that just off the top of your head that you've seen?
I definitely feel like the conversation themes are really relevant. I wouldn't add any, but I think that number is good. And those 4 categories are definitely, there's a lot within each one that people could work on. But I think having 4 will allow for enough randomness that brings in that random kind of real life feel. So I like that. I was wondering about the expression cards. What do those look like? What do these cards look like? What do you think?
card for what it can do.
Okay.
So that way, because it is kind of a complicated, I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot
so
going
that
on,
helps
right?
it be a little more concrete.
Right, and so you would be able to read what these cards are good to use on, and it'd be multiple things, not just one card for one question, because that would be really hard to do in a whole deck.
Right.
So hopefully multiple answers for one question, and those answers can also be used on other questions. So
Okay.
it makes sense.
So it's not scripted.
Right, yeah.
That's good.
That would be really hard for a card game to have
Right.
scripted, right? Because it's all shuffled.
Yeah, no, it's good. I was just worried about like this card only plays on this or
Yeah.
so that addresses that. One thing that came up for me, I'm wondering, so if you were to ask me, and I was playing this game, do you like sports? Or what sports do you like? And I had, basketball in my hand and stuff. I don't actually like sports. So as someone with autism, I might be like, well, I don't like sports, so I'm just not going to play that hand.
Right.
So how do you,
So maybe we could do a way you could just discard cards you don't like. So
okay,
you could just get rid of them and then draw names to play.
okay,
Extra.
to make it more relevant?
Right, so on your turn, instead of playing anything because you just don't like any of the conversations, maybe you could discard as many cards you like to draw as many, and then that's your turn. And then you can
Okay.
the next person.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
a
good
way
idea.
to-
Some way to address that, just because adding the imagination piece, like, oh, I'm imagining that I like sports, which for me, without autism, is actually hard. Imagining that you're interested in something, it's not going to keep their attention as
Right.
much. So just
That's really good. I don't think we haven't really addressed that, so we'll put that into
okay.
our conversations for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you put in I like the random, like the distractions and the appearance items,
Okay.
because I think pairing those with the conversations themselves and seeing how those aspects affect conversation is really important in people with autism. So I really liked that you did that, and it makes it more, like I said before, more random, more generalizable, which was a big concern that some of you actually brought up about how are we going to make
How to
this
do it.
apply to real life. So making those random things that you have to play right away, I think was a great idea.
Thank you.
Any more questions? That's all I came up with, but we'll
If you don't mind, we can sit down with you after and maybe find two weeks some of this and then
Definitely.
find another time to meet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couple of things. So one thing, I think that one thing you could do, you could imagine that, especially in a clinical situation, you might not want to have random cards. You might want to like stack the deck based upon a particular patient. So that might be an interesting way to, this patient has more problems with this particular area. So you kind of stack the deck to focus on that. That might be an interesting kind of twist on it.
Yes.
Another thing, I really like this idea of what you guys have done is you come up with a game, but you're not really sure about the content. So what do? You want to go to the experts and talk to them about it. And I think that's a really good way to do this. My last thing is, I don't get this idea of talking about job interviews and dating and your other conversations all at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like a question comes out about a job interview. What's your favorite? What did you work on last time or something? Or work on things or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's a question about dating. It seems like you're just getting it's confusing at that point. Now I don't know so it's almost what I was thinking is that maybe you have themes, like you have rounds that are based on particular conversation types, and then all the questions of the conversation are focused on that. But that may be the wrong thing to do. It may be better to actually mix these up so that they learn, given this particular conversation situation, then I don't have a good intuition on that, but that seems very distracting.
Right, and that's what, the latter was what you're talking about, that's kind of what we're going for is, how do we teach somebody that, we're going to have multiple conversations today, right? How do we make sure each time we have a conversation you're using the right words and the right phrases? And so, that's why we kind of like the chaos on the board of you play the right cards on the right cards so that you have the conversations are relevant, right? You don't play I love goldfish to your interviewer. You play that with your friend, right? So, hey, I love goldfish, I love too. Good. So, but I see what you're talking about clinically. Maybe, I don't know for sure. I'm not, obviously I don't have psychology or sociology could split the deck, and maybe for one game where you want to play with one person one-on-one, and you just take all the interview cards and play those, or just friend cards, and you only play those.
I think what Bob's saying makes sense, I'll really like your answer to it. This is a problem that gets dealt with in a lot of games that are card games that have a narrative element to them. And the way that it frequently gets handled is that there are certain types of cards that go across narrative elements and certain ones that have to be grouped together. So for example, in a Star Wars game or a Lord of the Rings game, you can't mix elves and dwarves in a deck, right? But you can, for example, have the ambush card apply to all of them, the land card apply to all. So Magic the Gathering lets you shuffle anything up the way you want to, for example. But like in Star Trek, you couldn't have Klingon officers and Federation officers in the same deck. You had to have all Federation officers. However, all could play the Red Alert card, because they all have red alerts on the deck, or the Beam Down to the Planet card, right? And so in a sense, you can imagine where maybe the conversations are themed, like the sports conversation, or the interview conversation, or the whatever conversation. But things like hygiene apply to all of those. So dirty shirt can be applied to any conversation. But this deck, so maybe pitch 4 decks with a common set of cards and a specific set of cards. But for your prototype, you only build one. Right? So you just have the one conversation. And then these are the universal things you can apply elsewhere, right? The second conversation I had is, whoever that is, Gavin. The second thing I want to have is a conversation about video game card games, right? So video game card games are really interesting, fun, frequently very difficult to pull off. And what you have to go back to is the reason you do a card game in general. There are sort of 2 types of card games, right? The first is you're using a card game because you didn't have the technology to do a video game, or you didn't want to do a video game. The second is the genre, the mechanics itself of a card game are suited towards this particular type of play. So compare, for example, a deck of cards, like that you play with poker, versus Magic the Gathering, for example. The reason you're using cards in Magic the Gathering, business excluded, is because each card is a rule modifier. And so you need to have that because the necessity of the card is each card changes the game. Whereas in a regular deck of cards, it's just a token, and that token has a value. It's a particular faction or a certain number. So in games that get translated to a video game, you then ask yourself, does it have to be a card or not? So if you have a very complex system that has lots of rule introduction, that's dynamic, then cards still make sense. So for example, like to do Magic the Gathering as a video game without cards, extraordinarily difficult, right? But to do Pokemon as a game without cards, very easy, because you only have an attack, and then all the cards just adjust values. So you get rid of all the cards entirely and put it into UI. So you have to ask yourself, are you better off with actual cards, or just taking the mechanics of a card game and putting those into UI elements, right? Like, is there a need to have to physically hide things on screen? Does each card carry with it individual rules that have to be addressed? If it's just values, then there's no reason not to abstract that into some sort of UI system. So I compare Pokemon, the Nintendo DS game, versus Pokemon the card game, right? It works fine without cards on the DS, right? And the other problem is, go back to your slide, is cards are frequently a UI nightmare. So like even on your example one, where you're not constrained with it, think of all the space you're losing on screen just to represent the metaphor of the physical universe of cards. And then think about that with the Magic the Gathering, when we saw that on screen as well, right? Even on a projector, we couldn't get the cards big enough to really read. You have to be inches from the screen. It's just you have to ask yourself, why am I representing this physical universe, right? And if there's a good reason, then do it, right? But also, you can use the mechanics of card games and liberate yourself from the physicality of cards. And just use that as menus or some other people element. It's just a decision you have to make. Does your game necessitate this visual metaphor? If not, then I would say ditch it because it's a burden.
I would say a great lesson. I don't know yet.
Yeah, you won't know. And you might not know till the end. You might get to the end of your prototype and say, wow, this would have been better off as menus, right? Well, find out. It's just something to keep in.
Real brief. Love the distraction card. This game seems super competitive. What if it was 3 people sit down at the table and kind of like Bob's idea, they play against the deck that's against them. So they're all at the job interview and they're competing against to answer all the questions together. Whoever has the most coins wins. Or something like that.
That's interesting.
Just a different.
One more thing, can I go back to what was already brought up, but about the, breaking it up perhaps into just interviewing just the different categories? And thinking about the clinical setting and actually making this marketable, that would probably be something to think about because we have a lot of, at least in our studies, a lot of guys that are transitioning from, and girls, but lots of guys from like high school to adulthood, and lots of times they just get lost. So those interview skills are like huge, or learning how to navigate, writing an application and all of that. So if a clinician wanted to use this game to help somebody with that, they wouldn't want to let other stuff thrown in there because they don't really care if they're dating. They want to get them, out on the job market or a voc rehab person would be the same
So
thing.
then split it up into just the themed.
Or at least that could be an option. And
Yeah,
I
you can pull
definitely
that
think,
and just play that one.
yeah, and thinking about it as a product, that would be a thing to think about.
But is there your answer?